Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true firsthand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Joining in with us today to share her experiences, laughs, and insights with us is a woman who in the last 4 years of knowing her has not only added immense color and love to my life, but has also gone through a full transformation of her own. She is an amazing coach who helps guide her clients into the fullest experience of life possible, is the founder of the Goddess Getaway Retreats, which she uses to help women from all backgrounds recognize their divinity and access the full range of their power in order to create more happiness, love, and purpose in their lives, is the host of the A to B with Rachel V podcast, and is someone who has had her fair share of curious plant medicine experiences. So please help me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Rachel Varitimos. What's up, Rach?
What's up? That was such a nice intro. You're the best.
Thanks. And for everyone listening who is unaware, Rachel is my lover. She is my better half. And so we're going to have a lot of fun today. And so I had to come correct with the intro. You know, I'm like, it's my baby girl. You know, I got to do you right.
You did me right.
Yes. Good. I like to do you right. You know, guilty as charged.
You
So, so I'd love to really hear, of course I know these things already, but I'd like to share with the listeners now because I think it's a really cool story. And, we've had the opportunity to share plenty of experiences together. So I would love if you could talk about, your background with psychedelics. I know specifically, you grew up in a household where, your parents weren't shy of telling you their experiences and not really telling you should never do that. Don't do that. They were always pretty like, yeah, I mean, try it if you want to, just be safe, like don't do anything stupid. But I'd really love to hear it from your mouth or in your own words, how you were brought up around psychedelics, if you thought they were bad your whole life, et cetera, and when the first time you tried it was, and, did you get a big aha moment at the first time, or did you did it take a couple times to really allow you to feel what they could do?
So one question I have for you is, would psychedelics include cannabis too?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, any psychoactive substance.
Okay, then yeah. So I have really different parents, as you know, where they are really open and they are under the impression that whatever mistakes I make, I will learn from. And so they're not going to tell me what not to do. But that being said, it's really funny because I didn't really care for cannabis. Cannabis was the first psychedelic I really knew about because when you're young, at least where I grew up in a very sheltered town where no one really talks about psychedelics. Maybe other kids my age knew about it and I was just out of the loop. Who knows? But I only really knew about cannabis, I would say, in early high school. It was the first time I tried it. And yeah, I tried it, didn't love it that much. I ate like a whole pack of Oreos, made icing, was dipping all the Oreos in icing, and I felt like I wanted to vomit after.
Yep,
and then I tried it. Yeah. And then I tried it again, same thing. And I was like, why do people like weed so much? I feel lazy and I just want to eat till I want to puke. Yeah. That's not fun. Yeah. And so I stopped using cannabis. And it's funny because I'm pretty sure as I went on in high school, I did know people who use psychedelics, but I almost think because my parents let me do whatever I want and let me make my own mistakes, I was personally cautious around psychedelics. It's like I was parenting myself. I was like, well, because it's up to me to make my own mistakes, I have to be more careful with what I do. So I avoided psychedelics, honestly, high school and even in college, they just weren't really abundant. So I didn't really try them in college, except for one time, which I will get into. And I would say it wasn't until actually my freshman year of college that I got really into cannabis. And that was because I had sleeping issues. As you know, it started when I was my whole life, basically. But when I was 15, it got really bad. And when I was 18, I was a freshman at Florida State. And I remember my roommate and I were like, let's smoke some cannabis. And we had a blast. We were at the top of a building, just laughing our ass off. And then I remember I slept so good after. And I didn't have this anxiety around sleep when I used it. And so I was like, oh my God, I get it. I finally get cannabis. And then I started using it for sleep specifically, but also to, laugh with my roommate. Mm-hmm. It was super fun. And then it's funny because this same roommate was the first girl that I tried acid with in my freshman year of college, I would say. And that was like a weird experience for us, which we can get into more now. But what I will say is I tried it my freshman year of college, and me and her couldn't go to the concert that we were planning on go to because we went to print out tickets for this concert and we couldn't figure out how to do it because we were tripping too hard.
You made the rookie mistake. You got to print out the tickets first.
We were freshmen. We didn't know what we were doing. Yeah. And so the whole plan went out the window. And then it was such an intense experience. It was good. I talked a lot. I talked everyone's ear off. But actually, even my dad called and he tricked me. And he used a voiceover thing. And he said, because I told him I tried acid. And him and his friend both did this, actually. They both called me. And they said, this is the federal acid police. We have heard you tripped on acid and we're coming to get you.
Your dad is such a unit.
And I remember I freaked out. I freaked out because I was like, who knows I did this? Yeah. And it was just such a weird voice message to get on your phone, especially when you're tripping for the first time. Yeah. And eventually my friend was like, you told your dad. And I was like, oh my God. So I called my dad and he's just laughing. And I was like, thanks, Dad. And it was just a really intense night. And after that, I honestly didn't have a desire to do acid again. Now I do it again, which we'll get into how I got into that again. But yeah, it was very open for me. I could do whatever I wanted, but I really didn't get into it, I would say, until college with cannabis and then after college with the other things. And that was just, I don't know, self-regulating, self-parenting myself. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. And, this could be a huge side tangent that I won't get into, but there is a really good argument for that type of upbringing, right? There's plenty of evidence to suggest now that when parents are like, don't do this, don't do that. It's like, literally, what are you focusing on? We know this from language work, right? If someone says, don't eat that cake. What do you want to do? You want to eat the cake, right? So if they tell you, hey, make your own decisions, but you're going to have to pay the consequences, right? So, I personally see a lot of, obviously, knowing you very well, one-on-one, I can tell everyone listening that Rachel is the kindest, sweetest person that I've ever met in my life. I always joke that she literally could not hurt a fly, like actually. And so there's definitely a huge argument for that, and meeting you and, having been so close to you the last 4 years, I've seen it firsthand,
Honestly, I agree with you. I feel so grateful that my parents brought me up the way they did. They didn't abandon me. It's not like they weren't paying attention and they didn't care. They cared so much. They loved me. But yeah, they just allowed me the freedom. And so it's actually a really cool perspective. I was allowed to do all this stuff, but I didn't really get deeply into psychedelics till after college.
Yeah. And, something I'd love to jump into, because I imagine you're going to have a very, interesting answer is, you said when you first connected with cannabis, which was the first psychoactive substance. And I realize some people listening are like, cannabis isn't a psychedelic. Technically, it can be, right? Because it does change the psychoactivity of your mind, right? That's probably not the right terminology. Forgive me, guys. But basically, I'm curious what changed for you, from interacting with cannabis in a way that really just made you aware that you were hungry and you liked Oreos into hey, now I'm actually having a deeper connection with someone around me, right? Your roommate, sleeping better. It seems like there was a shift there, right? And it could just be age, right? But I'd love to hear it, anything that comes to mind for you that you may think, looking back on it, has allowed you to reshape your relationship with cannabis that even lasts through today. What changed there?
Well, honestly, that's a really good question, because when I reflect back on it, I know exactly what changed, and it was me. And if I think back to college versus high school, the first time I tried weed was, I think, 10th grade. And, in 10th grade, I was a depressed teenager. I can still think back to high school and how depressed and anxious I always felt. I would walk through I remember it would be homeroom or before the bell would ring to go to school. And I would just be walking through the halls, listening to sad alternative music and probably The Used or something, something embarrassing. And I would just, wallow in misery. And I mean, thank God I'm not there anymore. So I think back to that time, it was just very dark. But my freshman year of college was this turning point for me where I had always had debilitating anxiety where I couldn't talk to a lot of people. I only had a couple friends at a time. Whereas when I got to college, I was forced to, expand my wings a little bit. And I would say like my healing process, my internal healing process was a really long and nonlinear path. But I would say my freshman year of college is when I started breaking out a little bit. I wasn't as depressed. And when I look back on it, it's because I was independent. I remember my first day of college, I looked around and I was like, this is like a teenage wonderland. Like we all get to do whatever we want. And it was just fun. And so it could have been that there was no responsibility. It could have been that like responsibility in terms of I have to be home like at a certain time or I have school the next day. Like a lot of my college classes were at later times and it could have been something like that. It also could have been that my sleeping issues started when I was 15. I had only tried cannabis like a little bit after my sleep issues started. And so by that point, 4 years later, I'm like, I want something to help my sleep. So when I found it, I was like, this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
That's my conclusion when I reflect on it.
Yeah. No, and that's really eye-opening, because, I feel as though these medicines, cannabis being one of them too, but especially, you talk about psilocybin or MDMA, they're talked a lot about in the regards of anxiety, depression, things like that, right? And so we're seeing some sort of link where, yes, right, maybe there was like an initial point where you had a lessening of your anxiety before you actually reintegrated cannabis, but there was this aha moment, right? So it seems from you that when you reintegrated cannabis in, you were at a point where you were then aware of like, hey, this is a lot more. Yes, maybe I still feel hungry or something, right? But there's more here, right? Like there's actually like, wow, I'm actually really enjoying this. First of all, I understand what this experience is enough to enjoy it, right? Because first, to actually enjoy something, you have to actually know what it is, right? That's why the first couple times you try really anything, it's kind of just confusion, right? Because you don't know, like, it's like going to a park for the first time and someone says you have to run through at top speed. Well, like, how much are you really going to enjoy that park? Because aside from having to run really fast, this is a silly analogy, but aside from having to run really fast, you're not getting to enjoy whatever's going on because you don't know, like, oh, around this turn, there's a beautiful tree right there, etc. So with psychedelics, that's been something I've experienced too, where the first time I experienced something, or even the first 5 times I experienced something, it's kind of like still like, pushing my feet into the water very slowly. And now I feel much more comfortable engaging with those medicines when I do feel the call. And so, moving on from that subject, I'm really curious, after, that first LSD experience, when was the next time, you tried anything? Was it that first time that we did it together?
I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah.
Guys,
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I just have to tell this story because this story is awesome, right? So, Rachel started working at the same place I was working. And of course, I noticed her. I mean, she's beautiful. So after a while, we were both single. And, I
broke up with my boyfriend for you.
Yeah. It's a deeper story, guys. So the plot thickens. At this point in my life, it was a very different Ryan than you're hearing talk right now, right? I wasn't as confident. I didn't know myself as well. And I wasn't exactly good at picking up signs, right? So Rachel's giving me some signs. I'm like oblivious, right? And she's like, this guy, what the hell? He's such an idiot, right? And so I'm sure you use kinder language than that. That's my language. But so one day you said, hey, we should do mushrooms alone together, right? And I was like, interesting. And long story short, we did mushrooms together, and it was the best experience ever. And here we are 4 years later. And so to know that was your next experience, I wasn't sure if there was one in between. That's why I wanted to give you the option. But I had to tell that story because it's so fun. It's such a good story.
No,
and
it's a really good story. I tell you, it was the first meeting you, and I had been in a relationship for 3 years, but like I mean, we had broken up a bunch of times. Meeting you was the first time I ever had such a strong intuitive hit that I would make a drastic decision like that with the trust that it was all going to work out. And I just like had this sense about you. You just had this energy where it's funny because the first time I met you, I remember coming home. And this is before I developed feelings for you. This is probably like in the first week of us working together. I was telling my parents how much we had in common. And I was like, he's like the same person as me. I've never met anyone who has so many things in common. And so when we had that first trip, that experience was amazing because first, we ended up like cuddling on the bed, which was really nice. And then I had this vision, and it was this vision that I had already felt, which was the whole reason why I made this decision to go for you.
Yeah.
was I saw us like two DNA strands intertwined. You know how the DNA helix, it's like both strands circling around each other. Mm-hmm. I saw us as those two strands traveling through space and time, and I can still see what it looks like. Like I can still see it wherever it is in my brain. If I think about it, I can see it. And I remember the background was a magenta-y red pink, and it had some purple hues mixed in. Like I can remember it vividly. And when I had that vision is when I knew, I was like, I know I'm on the right path. Whatever I'm going after in this man, I was like, this is what it was.
I have that effect on people.
Yeah. And then that kickstarted 4 years of us having the best relationship ever.
Yeah. And a lot of interesting experiences with plant medicines, And
a lot.
yeah, quite a few, and I credit, because I remember that night, and that was one of the first times that I had actually done the whole, Terrence McKenna, 5 dried grams in darkness, right? And basically we were just laying in my bed meditating, for lack of a better term, cuddling, meditating. And that was like, I credit that experience plus a couple other ones thereafter that were very similar between the two of us, for what got me into meditation, right? Like really, it was kind of funny. Like most people, or a lot of people, I won't say most people, a lot of people though, they'll say, and even I give this advice. I'm like, hey, do some inner work before you try plant medicines, right? It's just the safest way to do it, right? That being said, though, I am aware that my journey was a little bit the opposite, and yours was too in a little bit of a way, right? Like we didn't get into transcendental meditation until later, but I remember when we went to that transcendental meditation class and I like meditated for the first time and actually got out, I was like, oh, this makes sense. This is actually like a very similar place I get to on mushrooms, but I don't have to set aside a whole day to do it. I can just lay down for 20 minutes and tune out and get there and come back. And so, I really accredit mushrooms specifically for being my training wheels that got me into my inner work because, and we can talk about this now if you want to, but, I'd love to hear your take on how much more psychedelics can offer when you have the right tools to go along with them, right? Like meditation, like breath work, anything that really allows you to get still with yourself and actually understand what's going on, what you're feeling, and be able to make some connections to maybe some trauma that happened, right? But actually know how to handle it, right? So you're not just there seeing it without any way to actually go, okay, this is what's happening. I'm safe. I can go through this, etc. So I'd love to hear some of your favorite tools, maybe how psychedelics have helped you as well get into your personal inner journey. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Yeah, that's a really good question because when I think of some of the most useful tools people can use throughout life, it's mindfulness. And mindfulness is a tool that I was really familiar with, especially with meditation. It's like an active meditation, with walking, with all of those things. But, what really is it like to embody mindfulness, right? People talk about mindfulness, but how do you know you're doing it right? And I mean, I don't think you can do it right or wrong, but how do you know you're really getting the most benefit out of it? And I would say the mindfulness tool translates over to like mushroom trips that we've done. Because if I think about anytime I've done mushrooms, like if we do mushrooms on the beach in Martha's Vineyard, I can remember one time specifically where we were walking down the beach and I just felt so in the present moment and so at peace. And I remember looking at a bush. I thought it was a bush before I started tripping. But then after I started tripping, I was like, oh, it's a bunch of plants in the one area that make up a bush. And I could see every being, every living thing's individual like life force. And at that moment, I had this feeling of like true mindfulness. Like I had practiced mindfulness, I had practiced meditation, but it got me to a point really fast. And like that usually takes me 20, like 30, 40 minutes in meditation to get to. So I would say meditation's a great tool just to even get a sense of what psychedelics are like. Like I've been doing a lot yoga nidra meditations, especially since they work through the different energy bodies, and it's just gets you there. So that I would say, what other tools? Gratitude. I believe that if you're going to get into doing psychedelics, it's really important to be in a good mental mindset, because if you go into it and you haven't resolved some things, it can come back and bite you in a way that you didn't expect. Like, here's one thing, here's a tool. Always keep your room tidy and clean. And psychedelics have taught me how important that is. Because I remember a time when I tripped by myself at home. I was in my room and I got to this point where I was like, I can't handle this because there's mess. And I had to clean everything. And the whole trip was based around cleaning so I could be organized and feel at ease. And it was in that moment that I realized the importance of keeping a tidy and organized space. So I would say, like, it's funny because the tools lead to psychedelics lead to more tools. Yeah. So one of
it's a closed loop, you know?
Yeah. So one of the tools I got from it, I would say, is the drive to be more organized and tidy, because sometimes you know, you get into a rush during the day, you throw clothes places, you put them away eventually, but there's a little bit of a mess. I didn't realize how much that would affect me until I was on psychedelics. It's like psychedelics amplifies everything. So psychedelics are a really good teacher in that way, where it will amplify something and bring it to the surface. And then you can create tools from there, in my opinion.
Yeah. And what I was going to add to that is there's a difference between realizing, hey, there's something that's going on inside of me and I can't seem to figure it out and I would like some help, right? And then engaging with some plant medicines in a responsible manner, versus like being at a party and, you know, you have some stuff going on, but you're not even aware of what stuff is, let alone that you have it going on. And then you decide at midnight to eat mushrooms. And then like, I feel like that's what you were chatting about with like, make sure you're in a good mental mindset, right? That could strictly be like, you know, because for me, I connected rather with mushrooms a lot when my father was sick, you know, and I knew, like, I didn't exactly know how to vocalize it, but I knew I'm like, this has got to be traumatic for me. I know I'm not feeling it all the way. And I know that, you know, this is very frightening and I would like some help with that. And so I went into it knowing like, listen, this could be very like emotional. This could be very interesting, right? And I wasn't doing any like big amounts or anything, but I knew, I'm like, hey, you know, minimum effective dose during these times. And I knew that, you know, things could potentially get hairy, right? And so I was prepared for that. I wasn't expecting it, but I was also aware, you know, I was, you know, to use a cliche term, a realist. And so I feel as though that's been one of the areas I've seen people mess up the most, is they kind of just take them unconsciously. And like, listen, you know, like no one's perfect, but, you know, at the end of the day, if you're listening to this and you're either new to psychedelics or you're thinking about potentially doing them someday or connecting with them, you know, these are just important things that, you know, we've learned on our journeys that can help a lot, you know, because, you know, especially going to a lot of music festivals, I've seen a lot of people just make some really poor life decisions. And it usually happens in social situations where people are influenced by others or even influenced by anxiety that like they think they need to do what everyone's doing. That's actually what I've seen most of the time. I've never actually seen like someone peer pressuring someone into doing something. I imagine obviously it exists, you know, I'm not naive, but most of the time I've seen people like just peer pressuring themselves to fit in. And with psychedelics, that usually doesn't end well.
And that's a big part of it. That's what I was saying. It amplifies something. So if you're in a group of people and you think you can take mushrooms and you're going to handle it and it's going to be okay, but you don't know these people and you have confidence issues or trauma around some of these people, or anything that affects your ability to interact is going to amplify it. And so that would be taking it unconsciously. And I mean, I remember maybe one of the first times we tripped when I didn't know your cousin yet and he had come over, and I remember we were tripping together and I started tripping so hard I just got silent because he turned into this weird, he had his long dreads and he just turned into this cartoon animal that I didn't know how to interact with. And so, it amplified it. So I think it's also important, to do it with people you're comfortable around too, and to do it in a place where you feel completely safe. And that's also like, it amplifies like your inner world out. So like when I said, I felt like everything was a mess around me when I did mushrooms and I had to clean everything up, that was actually a reflection of my inner world having so much anxiety and jumbled up, being expressed on the outside as mess.
Yes.
And it was the mushrooms were just amplifying that for me. So they can be useful in the way where you can get amplified the things you need to fix or the things you need to work on. Because I would actually say both of those instances I just talked about where I felt uncomfortable around Jackie, mostly because I didn't know him. And, I didn't heal through some of my own stuff at that point. This is 4 years ago. And with the cleaning thing, if I reflect over the last 4 years, I've healed both of the things that were triggering for me. And so I believe that's why psychedelics have gotten easier for me, where I have less of those experiences.
Yeah. And, you said something really important there that I want to go back to, which was like, if it can sometimes manifest and then you can realize that, hey, maybe there's something on there, right? Where I've seen the most challenges are where like people either consciously or subconsciously think like, I'm good, like I got my shit figured out, right? And then they get hit with something like that. That then what happens is they realize in no shorter terms that they're not all figured out, but yet then the ego kicks back in and goes, dude, you're figured out, like leave it, right? And then they have that back and forth. And then especially if they have other people around or they're trying to be their ego self, right? They're trying to uphold who they normally are. And, they're not comfortable with saying, hey, I got to step out for a second. I got to like get my bearings again. That's where I see most people, falling short in experiences. And that, again, we could talk about boundaries and why it's so important to, number one, do it with the people in the set and setting that's the most healthy and safe for you. And, we've already talked about set and setting a bunch on the show, so I won't go like super into it, but just like a quick recap, make sure you have the right set and setting. And in that, make sure the right people are around you. If you want to do it around people, in my experience, groups of like even numbers work better than odd numbers, because in an odd number group, usually one person's left out.
Except for if it's us two, if you're with Adam. We did that a bunch of times. That's different. Yeah. I mean, you can do it. It's just, if you're new to psychedelics, you might want to start with groups of 2 or 4, or like even numbers. That way you kind of just always have someone who, if 2 people are talking and they're on their own adventure, you can kind of like, not feel completely alone. And so, something I haven't got to do on the show yet, most of the shows, I'm really, I'm meeting someone maybe for the first time, or we're chatting about, their personal journey. But because, I've had so many experiences with you, I'd really like to dive a little more into that, because this show is called This One Time on Psychedelics, right? And I imagine that many of the people listening would love to hear some good stories, right? I'm curious, and I have a feeling that I know what your answer is going to be here. What is your most intense experience you've had to date? And what did you learn on the other side of it? Well, the one recently, is that what you were thinking that I was going to say? I
was thinking the original 5-MeO experience, but yeah, either one of those.
Honestly, the mushroom one was way more than the 5-MeO. The 5-MeO, I feel like, was chump change compared to the mushroom one in terms of me getting lost and not knowing. Yeah, this is where you have to be careful with psychedelics. So we did 5-MeO in January and we tried it. And yeah, I would have said that was my most intense psychedelic experience to date. My body dispersed into nothing. I just felt like sound and vibrations. I remember the same mantra coming to my head over and over, which was, I give 0 fucks. I give no fucks. It like stripped me of all my fucks.
Yeah.
And
it's a quick way to do it.
Yeah. 5-MeO was a great way to strip me of all my fucks. And I came out of it. I released for like 20 minutes. You know, I laughed hysterically to the point where I was crying hysterically, to the point where I was like shivering. My jaw was everything, every emotional release you can think of, I had in that moment. And afterward, I felt like a newborn baby that had all like 27 years of emotion, ice cream scooped out of me. Like I just felt empty to this place where like, and that's why I said I give 0 fucks. I didn't feel like I had any fucks weighing me down. I was just at that free point. So that was really intense, but it was beautifully intense. And then you and I did a mushroom tea on Valentine's Day, because once a year or so, me and you will do a 5-gram journey, the hero's dose. So we did a 10-gram tea between 2 of us, so 5 grams each, which we've done a few other times, and every time is blissful and floating in outer space. But, and this is something I always like, be careful if you do 5-MeO DMT, like take a few months off of doing anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of interactions that I feel people are just becoming aware of. Combo's another one. Like, do not do combo if you've done 5-MeO recently. There's so many things that have yet to be discovered because, again, the research is limited.
I mean, we thought we had waited long enough.
Yeah,
it's
we had gone about 6 weeks.
Yeah, but that mushroom trip was the most intense thing I've ever gone through. And it's because in 5-MeO, I was still there, but I was dispersed. In this mushroom trip, I don't know if I was still there. I don't know where I was. I don't even know if I was dispersed. It was black. It was,
you know what it seemed like? It was like you had an away message on, you know, on AOL, like when you put your away message on and like, you're not there, but you're kind of there. Like your words are there, but you weren't really there. Yeah. That was a very interesting experience.
It's funny because you were having a grand old time laughing off the side, and you thought that I was holding great space for you. Cause apparently I was sitting on the bed, staring at you, whispering under my breath. I don't know where I was. All I remember is it started with the mantra, let go and trust. You can have anything you want. In the first minute, I thought, no, the first probably hour, I was like, how nice. What a nice mantra. I love this thing. I was like, let's keep going. Like, this is great. Yeah. And then that mantra kept going another hour and another hour and another hour. Honestly, the whole trip. And by the end of the trip, I wanted to rip my brain out of my head. If I even knew where my brain was, I didn't know. I was just like, end this. Stop.
Yeah.
And I thought I was going crazy. It was a little scary, and I lost all my emotion. I remember telling you, I don't know if I can feel feelings for you. And I tried to get, like, we were going to bed. He was trying to sleep, and I remember I tapped him. And I was like, will you make out with me? I just want to see if I can feel it. And he was like, I'm trying to sleep.
I was like already half asleep. I
was like, understandable.
Yeah.
So I let it go.
I was like, wait, what? Is this a dream?
Yeah, it was scary. And it was the most intense psychedelic trip I've ever been on, more so like than the 5-MeO. And I think it's because it maybe reactivated the 5-MeO.
Yeah. That is a thing. And again, I don't, I looked into it, and there's not too much information out, but I mean, to put it this way, like you said, I've done my fair share of heroes doses, and that one was like 10 times what I was used to. And to corroborate what you were saying, guys, I thought Rachel was holding the best space for me. Like I was going through some deep trauma, like letting go of some stuff that I had been carrying for years, like finally had done the inner work necessary before this experience to really become safe in myself and let some stuff out of my father passing, over just life, over like my inner child. And so like, I had this interesting thought right before, right? And I was laughing, having a time, right? And Rachel was sitting in my bed, just kind of like looking down at me, just like whispering. And I was like, wow, she's doing witchy shit. Like, this is amazing. And so like, I'm laughing, I'm like, just talking to myself. And I have this like all of a sudden thought just boom, pop into my head. And it was like, laughter's kind of like crying. And then as soon as that clicked into place, I cried for the next 2 hours. And you were just there the whole time, just staring at me, not touching me, like perfectly, like near enough to me that I felt like held, but you weren't touching me. And again, like if I had seen you crying, I would have like been like, oh my God, are you okay? Right. So like, I was like, wow, this woman is amazing. Like, and I remember telling you like, this is your superpower, and you were like, what, huh? Oh yeah, sure. And then boom, right back into your mantra. So I was like, wow, she's just literally going to work right now. And it was so funny, because not until later on did we actually talk about our experiences and realize we had two, similar, but same, but different experiences.
Yeah. So, I just also tell that because it's good to be important. It's good to be important. It's good to be aware.
Yeah.
And it's not going to stop me from ever doing it again. Like I'm just being more cautious and not doing stuff like that again. And that's just part of learning the lessons.
Yeah.
It's not like, you do psychedelics like all the time. So it just happened to be that we did 5-MAO and then did a mushroom trip like that a month after.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say the mushroom trip was the most intense experience, and the 5-MAO was the second most.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's why, like, one of the things that, and we've had the opportunity to do this as well. And, both of us have some training in this regard too, but, making sure that if you are, especially if you're new to these things, like, what I honestly suggest, like if I could do it all over again, like, do I regret anything? No, obviously not. I had great experiences and I'm grateful for every single one of them. But especially if in 2021, you're deciding to do psychedelics, just go seek out a professional for your first time, right? Until because again, like you're playing with your consciousness, right? So you're playing on your grasp on reality, right? And I firmly believe that not everyone is meant to do psychedelics, right? Like, I think that's one of the big mishaps of like the 60s was they were like, hey, dose the planet. And I get it from like hey, everyone should experience this, but it's also very subjective, right? Like what someone might enjoy about it. Like I am well aware. I very much enjoy psychedelics, right? I enjoy exploring consciousness. I enjoy these things, right? But if I was to go to my mother and say, hey, try this, she doesn't want to do that, right? And that's good. That's her honoring herself. And so like for anyone listening, if you're curious about this, there's enough resources online now where you can go out and find someone who is licensed, who understands these things. And, if you go to a woman that I had on here a while ago, Cole Whitty, she's amazing with this. And she has a whole list of questions that you can ask a facilitator before you decide to work with them. Like, how long have you been training? Where did you get your training through, et cetera? All super important questions, right? Because again, especially with shamans and people like that, there is some like black magic stuff that can be done, right? And, we're not going to get super woo-woo, but just know that stuff is real. Like being, quote unquote, possessed, losing track of where you're supposed to be. I mean, think about it this way, right? It's almost like when you are taking a psychedelic, you're like an astronaut who has a tether attached to him, right? And he's floating outside of the spaceship, right? And depending on how much you take, you're tethering farther and farther out. There's nothing that says that something like a moon rock can't fly by and cut that tether and you just float out forever. There's definitely like that risk, right? And so one of the main reasons, as you know, that I made this show was not just to talk about like everything being sunshine and rainbows, but also like to talk about what we just went through, right? Like, hey, these things do come with their risks, right? And that's not to say don't do them or to scare you. It's just go into it acknowledging like, hey, if something comes up, I'm ready to handle it. And I feel supported with the people I'm doing it with.
Yeah, you don't need to be a hero.
Yeah.
Like if you want to think you're like cool by taking extra or by your friends daring you to take more when you're already like, you're not the hero. You're not the hero. I was going to say that, but I was like, I don't want to make people feel like they're a zero. No. But it's something like psychedelics have actually been some of the most life-changing things in my life, but they've also taught me, like we talk about when you get the call, hang up the phone.
When you get the message, hang up the phone.
Yeah, that's what it is. When you get the message, hang up the phone.
Yeah.
And I actually would say, especially 2021, I got the most life-changing experience from psychedelics where I truly felt large layers of me being removed, like layers of undesirable parts that I wanted to shed. And I would say they're so useful for that. And just because they're doing that doesn't mean more is more.
Yeah, exactly. That's the number one thing. And really, what is the integration process? Like, what does integration even mean? I mean, there's many definitions, but how I see it is like, so the PEAK, peak experience, that you experience when you take a psychedelic is only the first stage of a psychedelic experience. That continues to have a ripple effect far. Like, I mean, those two experiences this year are the only ones we've done, right? And I'm still feeling the ripple effect from those, right? I'm still having aha moments. I'm still putting things together. And so that's why it's so important to have that integration, because otherwise it's like a dream. You wake up and if you don't write it down right away, it just starts to fade away, right? And then you need another experience and you need another experience. And that's when you start really risking, because you're in a vulnerable position too, because then you think you need these things, which you don't, right? They're just a reminder. This is my personal subjective opinion, right? That they're simply a reminder for what already exists, right? In the same way that, because it's really hard to ride a bike, right, without training wheels first. So you put the training wheels on, so you get the kind of idea of it. And then when you're ready, you take the training wheels off. So that's how I think about psychedelics. Now, of course, psychedelics aren't actually training wheels, so they're not exactly like that. Sometimes I do enjoy interacting with them, right? And when I feel a calling these days, right? That's when I interact with them. You know, there were definitely days earlier in my psychedelic experiences where I would get just curious and do it a little more frequently. These days, life is enough of a psychedelic experience. You know, owning a business and running 2 podcasts, man, sometimes it can feel like a psychedelic experience. So these days, I'm a big minimum effective dose guy, you know, so yeah.
Yeah, and to go off of that, like using psychedelics for like having an intention before you use psychedelics, not just using them because you're like, oh, it's been this amount of time, time to use them.
It's Saturday, might as well.
Yeah, like time to use them. Like me and you, one thing I'm really proud of is we use them intentionally. Like even though we did the mushroom ceremony 6 weeks after doing the 5-MeO ceremony, our intention was to connect. It was Valentine's Day. Mm-hmm. We had an intention with this. And it's funny because the time before that we had done a 5-gram mushroom tea was the year before. And our intention with the mushroom tea, like literally a year before this past one, was, should we get into the coaching business? What's our purpose? I remember you and I asked that. We were like, we're going to do a mushroom tea. We had just left the dispensary. We were just getting into coaching. And we were like, are we on the right path? And you do that tea. Oh, and I got the most surefire, intuitive hell yes I've ever felt in my life. And that is why mushrooms can be so beneficial in that way, where if you're questioning whether something's coming from intuition or your mind ego, that was super useful for us. I remember at the end, we were like, hell yeah, we're on the right path. Yeah. And now look where we are.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, it's so fun too, because really the first time I interacted with psychedelics, it felt like, oh, I've been here before. Like I remember this. Right. And that same type of feeling now I feel in my life all the time, right? Like when I first met you, it was a very similar feeling, yet I had no psychedelics in me, right, whatsoever. And I remember the first time you came in, we chatted and it was like, whoa. And that's like what another thing psychedelics have really done for me is being a Westerner, growing up in a traditional, like my parents were amazing. My mom's still amazing. Like they were awesome, right? But they didn't know anything about energy, right? Well, how many Western people really knew about energy unless they were hanging out with some gurus back in the day, right? So for me, mushrooms really allowed me to once again throw the training wheels on and feel energy, feel like when I'm getting my battery charged or when I'm getting it drained. So now when I'm in a situation, right, and I'm maybe meeting someone for the first time or deciding whether to go into business with someone, if I'm hanging out with them and all of a sudden, like, I just feel that beaming, like, oh my God, it feels like I just drank an espresso, that's a good sign. On the other hand, if I'm feeling kind of lethargic and like energy is being taken from me, that's a sign that, hey, this person is amazing and it's just not right for me, right? Like, this is like, I would be doing them a disservice and they would be doing me a disservice, right? It's a mutual thing. And so that's been a huge aha moment for me also.
Yeah, I would say they're amazing for understanding what energy actually is. Like everyone says everything is energy, but how do you believe that? You can't, it's a story. It's like someone tells you a story, but if you haven't felt it before, you can't believe it. You have to feel it to believe it. And it's funny because I have a couple instances where we've tripped where I have felt, and then it's allowed me to finally believe a concept I had been hearing for years. So well, I'm just going to say this real quick. This is not the concept I was going to say about, but I remember one time we felt the energy so much. I think it was you, me, and Adam. We were looking at an apple that was on a table or a dresser, and we stared at it for 30 minutes thinking we could get it to fall off the table because we felt so connected to the apple. Yeah. That was just a small example. But a bigger example was, I think this was a couple of years ago on New Year's, we did one of those 5 gram teas. Like I said, we do them once a year. It's always on those that I get the most profound, just the most profound outcomings of them. And so I remember it was New Year's a couple of years ago, and I got to this point where I felt the oneness. And it was, people talk about we're all one, we're all just energy intermingled. I felt it. I remember I was hanging out with you, our friend Ryan, and I couldn't tell if I was me or if Ryan was me or if I was Ryan or if the other Ryan was Ryan. Like, we all felt the same. And I remember just being shocked, being like, oh my God, I get it. And it's because I could feel that we were pure energy outside of our bodies. I could feel our energy was actually intermingled, and our body was just this placeholder for like the center core of our soul. But all of our energy was so intermingled that I literally was Ryan and he was me.
How did it feel to be 6'5"?
I don't even know, because it was outside of the meat suit. It was energy expanded beyond the meat suit, which is the coolest feeling you'll ever feel. And it's when I truly believed in the idea of manifesting, in the idea of telepathically communicating. It made so much sense because I was living it. And I mean, me and you hang out so much. There are so many times where I know exactly what you're going to say. And yeah, it could be because you know someone, but it could also be because your energies have intermingled so much that you become more one and you end up thinking the same things.
I mean, it's crazy. We finish each other's.
Should I say? Which one should I say?
Sentences.
Sentences?
Yeah.
We have 2 that
we have 2 of those. We'll save the other one, but we may not practice that. But, it reminds me of what, I've heard Paul say a bunch, Paul Check, which is life is not an observation sport, right? You got to go out and live it. It's a living sport, right? And, one of the things I've noticed is that, I think a lot of the places that religion has fallen short, right? Like, because religion is based on something so beautiful, right? And it's based on a lot of the things we're talking about, right? Helping people discover that, like, hey, life is about being alive, period, right? There's nothing you have to do. There's nowhere you have to be. You don't have to be anyone, right? You can just live, right? And so one of the places I think religion has fallen off is they've stopped preaching how important it is to have the direct experience of God or the universe or source or whatever you want to call it themselves, right? So then a lot of people read about it, but reading about it, especially translated through 10 dead languages and people that won wars and people that didn't win wars and whatnot, is not the same as having a direct experience. And you don't need psychedelics for that, right? You can do it through meditation, you can do it through breath work, but having some sort of direct experience where you get to understand what, like, we're talking about, right? And so, for anyone listening, like, if you haven't tried psychedelics yet, go do some breath work, right? Completely sober. There is so many tutorials on YouTube. Look up some Wim Hof. I have a certain style I love that I'll chat more about. It's nothing crazy. It's just 10 breaths. And basically, you do a
called DMT breathing.
Yeah. It's a DMT breathing series where basically, or style where basically your body creates DMT. The lungs are one of the places that it produces it. And so you're just basically building the DMT up in your system and then squeezing and pushing it through. And you get a nice little interesting rush from it, And so those can be some really fun ways to try things and get that direct experience. If you're someone who's like, I don't want to try psychedelics, I get it. They're pretty wild, right? Like, they're not meant for everyone. And so use discernment, honor yourself, be true to yourself and ask yourself, are these things right for you? And if they're not, do not feel any judgment over it. Don't feel like you're missing out on something. It's not about that, right? Maybe you're already at that level and you don't need them.
I'm jealous of those people.
Yeah, there are a lot of people like that. I mean, my grandmother was one of them. I think about it, in the Fifth Agreement, they talk about the 3 levels, the underworld, they call it purgatory, and then heaven, right? That's what, like, the Christians call the 3 levels. And she was totally in heaven. I mean, just I mean, when you really look at the 4 agreements, be impeccable with your word, always do your best, don't make assumptions, don't take things personally, and then be skeptical, but learn to listen. I mean, that was her. And she was 96 when she passed. I mean, she grew up in a very different time. So she just had a lot more time to be still with herself. There were no cell phones. There were barely even cars around when she was born. So, she had a lot more time to be still. And so there is that missing element these days. And of course, we have a million other good things. I know someone's going to be like, oh, the old times suck too. It's like, whatever way you want to look at it, you can look at it. But, it is interesting that in our modern day world, we don't have a lot of chance to be quiet with ourselves. So get still, guys, in whatever way you want to do it. It'll give you good medicine. Yeah,
we don't. And I think that's what mushrooms have taught me the most. I would say out of all psychedelics, mushrooms are my favorite because they allow you to be still, to be mindful, to feel the energies of our things, to appreciate. I appreciate nature so much when I'm on psychedelics. And what that's allowed me to do is off of psychedelics, go back as a kid and remember what it's like to be appreciating nature as much. Like I remember a psychedelic trip brought me back to a memory of when I was a kid, walking around in my backyard, looking for caterpillars, looking at the trees, being like, I'm in a jungle, I'm scavenging. And it's so cool because we forget what it was like to be kids. We forget what it was like to be kids and pretend that we're on an adventure just because we're in our backyard. And I would say it's really beneficial for keeping you in the moment and keeping you in that childlike state as well.
Yeah. Well, Ray, this has been an absolute blast. I want to make sure that I give you a chance to tell people where to find you. This is a perfect time to spit your new podcast, which I'm so excited about. So tell the people where they can find you, where they can connect with you, anything you're offering right now, maybe a good time to talk about your retreat a little bit too, and the podcast.
So we'll start with... You can find me on Instagram. It's Rachel_Varitimos, which I'm sure in the show notes it will say how you spell my name.
I'll make sure to put it in there.
And if you go to my Instagram, you'll learn more about the Goddess Getaway, which is the retreat I put on for women. It's very transformational. At my last one, I literally saw women change, like their face changed from day 1 to day 5. And that's because when you learn to raise your vibration, the way you look changes. And we do a lot of inner work. We do a lot of work that will get you to the effects of psychedelics without using psychedelics. So we do a lot of breath work. We have a day of inner wisdom. If you want to catch me on my podcast will be dropping in the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes out. And it is called A to B with Rachel V. And it's all about showcasing really incredible people who have transformed from ordinary to extraordinary in their life and how they did that and now how they're helping others do the same. Because, we see so many people go on these crazy transformation journeys from A to B, but we don't always hear about everything it took for them to get there. You might be on Instagram and you see people say little blurbs here or there giving tips, but there's so much that goes into a transformation. It's nonlinear. And so that's what I'm showcasing in this podcast. I'm really excited about it.
Awesome. And as you know, because you've listened to these episodes before, I have one last question for you. If you're up for it, Ray, what do you say?
I'm up for it.
All right, let's do it. Send it. All right. So if someone listening was just swayed by you to experience psychedelic medicines for the first time, what piece of advice would you relay to them to allow them to have the smoothest experience possible?
I have 2.
You can do 2.
Start with less and have no expectations.
Spoken like a true gangster. So as soon as I started this show, I knew it was only a matter of time until Rachel and I got to chat about our individual and collective plant medicine experiences. Rachel and I have been fortunate enough to travel to some incredible places to experience these medicines in their native lands and have continued to discover firsthand just how valuable inner work, the right integration techniques, and a healthy mind/heart space is in the scheme of a successful plant medicine experience. Rachel is an absolutely amazing resource to discuss these medicines with and to learn from. And if any of you listening are currently curious about learning more about plant medicines or what tools/techniques are useful in the integration process, then reach out to Rachel and allow her to empower you with knowledge today. And speaking of empowerment, Having the opportunity to do this show and talk psychedelics and plant medicines with y'all is an extremely empowering experience, to say the least. And I would be so grateful if you could share the show with those you love and leave reviews on iTunes, as it helps spread the message of what these medicines have to offer with the world at large, to which I am extremely grateful for. Rachel, thank you so much for stopping by to journey with us today. And until next time, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.